Embrace's mobile observability is built on OpenTelemetry. From the mobile SDKs and the Embrace dashboard, you can send traces, logs, and metrics to the OTel collector or the vendor of your choice. In this tutorial, the first of 3, we'll see how to send traces and logs from an iOS app to Grafana Cloud. To get started, we'll enable a sample iOS app with the Embrace Apple SDK. You should configure the SDK as early as possible in the app lifecycle in order to gather telemetry quickly in a user's session. Here, we'll do so in the Swift UI app's init method. First, import the Embrace IO framework. Then, use the Embrace SDK's setup method to customize the SDK configuration, and then be sure to call start afterwards. This setup call takes as an argument an Embrace.options object. You can use this object to customize the SDK's configuration in a variety of ways. To link your app to Embrace, add your app ID here. An additional optional argument in this object is the export option, which we can use to attach OTel exporters while configuring the SDK. The export allows you to add a log exporter, span exporter, both, or none, which will end up a no-op piece of functionality. Any exporter that conforms to the OTel Swift protocol will work here. For example, we can import a standard out span exporter which comes from the OTel Swift repository. The SDK feeds any OTel compliant traces to the trace provider, and this exporter will print those traces to Xcode's console. If you run the app, you should start to see some of the automatically instrumented traces that the SDK is capturing in this app. Out of the box, the Embrace SDK will automatically capture common mobile activity like networking and push notifications. Each of these actions is modeled on an OTel signal type, specifically traces and logs. In addition, we can add our own instrumentation in the key user flows of the mobile application by manually adding traces and logs. Here, we will model an auth flow that sees whether or not a user succeeds in logging into the app. Using tracing, we'll follow the technical flow for login step by step, from checking any previous user tokens TTL, to using Face ID, to navigation, and so forth. In the past, we've also had an issue where using Face ID on lower-end devices has throttled the device's computational abilities and made it unusable, so if we encounter this issue, we'll want to log that. We have our instrumentation in place, but now we'll want to send that data somewhere so we can make sense of the activity on each device. Grafana can receive your traces via the OpenTelemetry protocol. The process for exporting your traces and logs from the Embrace SDK is simple. From your org page in Grafana Cloud, configure OpenTelemetry in your stack. This page will tell you which of the defined OTLP endpoints your account uses for traces and logs. Hang on to this for later. Then, to authorize your exporter's request to Grafana Cloud, you'll need to generate an API token. This has preset access policies that allow you to read and write traces and logs. Create the API token, then in the environment variables, grab the header value that you'll use for authorization in your app. Be sure to keep this value somewhere safe, as you'll need it as an auth header from the mobile app. With that header in hand, we can now replace the standard out exporter with ones that will transmit telemetry over HTTP. We can get these as well from the OTel Swift project. Since Embrace's export argument only requires that the span exporter and log exporter conform to OTel Swift protocols, we can swap our trace and log exporters right in place. Our HTTP exporters for logs and traces will need to use a URL session that contains the Grafana token as an authorization header. Configure this, and then you can hook up both the OTLP HTTP trace exporter and OTLP HTTP log exporter. For the URL, take that OTel endpoint you got from earlier and specify the routes for traces and logs. Now we can export to Grafana. After running the app some more, we can see a picture of our traces and logs in Grafana. We can get further details about them, begin to build metrics, and braid them together with the other telemetry that we're tracking from other services in our stack. Meaningful information from the mobile client is a mix of automatic and manual instrumentation. To make sense of user activity, you'll want to add tracing to key flows in addition to the existing auto instrumentation for things like network requests and views. Remember also that these exporters are potentially sending telemetry from many device sessions concurrently to Grafana. In a later tutorial, we'll talk through how to handle that potential fire hose of data.